to not lose heart when anger gets the best of you. And if it is something that continues to get the best of you, to keep working at it. There is a great deal of hope. It's not insurmountable, even though it's going to show up from time to time.
Welcome, everyone, to Breaking Bread, the podcast brought to you by Apostolic Christian Counseling and Family Services. Excellent to have you along. Today, we're going to air the second part of a series on anger and my conversation that I'm having with Brian Sutter. When we left off, we just started to open up the concept of using others to help give us insights into ourselves and our anger journeys. So let's go there now.
To do that, I would just encourage you to invite people to do that with. And again, that's scary, but you'll need some help navigating it. Just think of, let's say, somebody who just seems really angry. We'll just kind of get a picture in your mind. And they don't recognize it, or they do recognize it, but they've attached it to, well, I have righteous anger towards this person's, sin. And that's what we tend to do. We tend to say, well, I'm angry about this, or we make it something that's okay to be angry about, but actually maybe it's something that we've been hurt by. And if we don't slow down and really think about, is that really the case? Is that really what's going on? And doing that in relationship with somebody who can challenge us and maybe ask us questions or make us think about it a little bit different way, we just keep coming up with the same conclusion, and then we're not actually getting the information from the anger that's actually meant to help us and help even us repent and grow.
Yeah, that's really helpful. And the examples, I think, are really helpful, too. Let's take on this example we've been working with a person who feels challenged, and then they get really angry. So let's suppose this person has the wherewithal to say, okay, I get angry like this. I know when I'm at a 25, right? Yeah. I know what triggers it. That's when I get challenged. Sure. How could that person engage with their support group or engage with their community, whether it be a spouse or a mentor or a good friend? How could that person engage in a meaningful way to help sort out this very issue?
Yeah. Well, I think just putting it on the table with that support person. So that might look like calling them out, hey, could we get together for coffee? And I'm noticing that I tend to get really angry whenever I experience a question or something from another individual that feels like they're challenging me. And I can't quite put my finger on why that bothers me so much. And I'd like your help in exploring that.
And then for the explorer, what doors would you try to push open? What would you try? What would you test?
Well, I think with that, a couple questions would be like, is that only in this particular relationship? Is it something that's unique to this relationship and maybe the way this person presents that challenge?
So then you would be asking, is this coming from a spouse, or does this happen when your boss does it? Does this happen when your neighbor does it? Does this happen when your child does it?
Right.
Because all of that would be telling.
Exactly. So if it's something that's pretty universal, then that gives us more information like, oh, that's interesting. So it's not necessarily something probably about this person. It's really more just about challenge in and of itself. And that makes it more likely, in my opinion, that that's probably something that maybe wasn't part of your culture growing up, and that, let's say, Dad said something, there were no questions asked, there were nothing that was explained, it was just, Dad says it, we go. And that's just the way you view how it should go, and you don't even consciously realize that. It's just part of your fabric.
Right. Which means that part of the remedy then would be working out my paradigm.
Right. And starting to redefine some things. To redefine, like, respect does not necessarily mean agreement all the time. Or, challenge doesn't necessarily mean that somebody's against you or that they don't think that you've got a good idea or that you're incompetent. It just, maybe that's the paradigm they grew up in, and if somebody throws something out, you want to make sure it's a good idea.
You're really changing the messaging then. Oh, I've gotten challenged by my wife or my boss or whatnot. And it doesn't mean necessarily they're being disrespectful to me. What does it actually mean? That's really the help that you're providing that friend.
Right, and trying to help them come up with what's a helpful way for them to frame that.
To process the reality.
Yeah, that's going to help them not move into anger, but more in this is their way of being a teammate and helping us make sure we come up with a good idea, the best idea.
You see, now that's really helpful too, because now we understand that anger is going to be deployed erroneously, isn't it? And that's part of our problem.
Right.
It's deployed erroneously because of misconceptions,
Yes.
inaccurate perceptions of the world, not interpreting our surroundings correctly.
Right, right. And I think in that, like, a big part of anger is we personalize. We personalize what people say or do, and what that means is that we take it on as something that's really negative about us, or they're attacking us, and that's a huge part of anger. Another thing is that I think many of us hold our ideas or beliefs too precious. Now, again, I'm not talking about core Christian beliefs, but just in general that we have a hard time being open to the idea that we might be wrong, or that our idea could be influenced or shifted in a positive way. Most of us, that's really a hard pill to swallow.
Yeah. And as you were talking about, there's kind of a fear there, a fear that what if I'm wrong, or what if I'm way off base, or what if I have, and so we can kick against that fear by just being angry.
Right.
There again, taking the aggressive rather than, well, maybe I am wrong, and that's not the end of the world.
Exactly. That part of life, hopefully, is that my ideas and beliefs get refined and they start to become more aligned with what is right and good and true, even if they're things that aren't like core fundamental things. That's actually a good thing and a part of growth and development, not necessarily a bad thing, or that, oh man, I look at all the things I've been wrong about for so long, to not swim in that, but really to swim in the excitement about growth and learning and moving
See,
forward.
now that's really interesting. So when you say taking yourself, I'm not sure you use this phrase or not, taking yourself so seriously, is really that. It's important for us to have a real growth mindset, isn't it? Mm-hmm. Right?
Yeah.
That we are works in progress, and we start from the position that we don't see it all perfectly.
Yes.
We've made mistakes, right?
Yeah.
And we're going to continue to improve and do things better. I mean, even starting with a mindset like that about oneself takes a ton of steam out of potential anger.
Oh my goodness, absolutely. Yeah, it really does. Yep. So let's say that's the situation where it's kind of a universal, and then you kind of explore that, and that's helpful. Now, if it's kind of just showing up in one relationship, then I think you explore it a little bit differently, in the sense like, why here? Why in this situation? And exploring that together. Maybe that's because of the particular dynamic. Maybe it is because of the way they treat you. Maybe it's not necessarily because of that, but maybe it's a way, their certain facial expression provokes that in you, or their role. It could be lots of different things. But to explore, what is it about that, and how can I?
So if this anger reaction towards correction seems to always come from my boss, or it's always triggered by my spouse, or it seems to be triggered by church leadership, or it gets triggered by my kids, that would always be telling if it's coming from a unique source.
Right. Yep. And then, too, a lot of these things do originate in our history. So that probably is going to take you down the same path of, why is it that this always comes with my kids? Well, maybe that is because of the way you were raised and the way, unconsciously to you, the way you felt like kids were supposed to interact with a father or a mother, or, a boss situation. Maybe you had a boss in a previous job and the way they interacted with you, and that has an impact on that.
And would you be exploring those soft emotions that lie beneath?
Exactly, that could be part of it, especially in that boss scenario. If there's been hurt there from a past relationship, or even in the present boss relationship, let's say all of a sudden you just get angry whenever over the last 6 months. But if I think about that, 6 months ago, this thing happened. Maybe this anger in the present is really more about, I feel hurt by this, and I need to work through that.
So there's something that's unresolved.
Exactly.
And so part of the answer of my future anger is finding resolve in my past.
Yeah. And again, one of the things to consider in this is we're thinking about the starting point of recognizing ourself, recognizing our emotions, recognizing what pulls it up, that I think it's important to recognize that if we tend to see the problem as ourselves, then to be a little bit skeptical towards that. If that's our default, we're always going to go towards, well, I just need to look at this differently. And you know what, if I could just do something differently, then the other person would do something different. There's probably something there, but if that's your default, you might also want to think about what else maybe is part of the puzzle. Not that you could change what's outside of yourself, but at least to acknowledge it. Whereas if your tendency is to focus on what they need to do differently, and that's kind of your default, then you may need to have a little bit of skepticism towards that and start to think about, my perception. I wonder what could change about my perception or the way that I'm presenting that would be helpful.
Because if we're trying to fix our anger problem in these other places, we're just not going to make the ground.
Right. We're looking in places that we've always looked, then it's probably not going to be helpful. What we're looking for is, what is it that maybe I need to do a little different? What is it that I need to think a little differently about? Maybe that's myself. Maybe it's the situation. And we all have tendencies, and just trying to take a little bit different look at it.
Yeah, that's interesting. So I alluded to, God was angry, right? We have in the scripture, be angry and sin not. We have Jesus, right? The notorious turning over the tables, right? What exactly that looked like and what exactly happened in the temple, we don't really know. But these are all, I think, charged truths that those who are angry really kind of hold to.
Yeah.
So I'd like you to speak to that angle.
Yeah. I think it is important to recognize that anger in and of itself is not wrong. I'll never forget, there was, after having a few kids and they're really young, and I'm meeting with a mentor friend, and just like, man, I just am getting so angry. It feels like all of the time. And his question was, well, do you think it is appropriate anger? Let's talk through that. And that was such a helpful question for me to be able to say, you know what, some of this is okay. Some of this is appropriate. And recognizing that that is part of how God's designed us, and even the emotion that God experiences and displays in lots of different places.
I think that's helpful too, to understand that. Is it appropriate? And then, am I then being energized to do the appropriate thing?
Exactly.
Right?
Yep.
Which is sometimes where we go off the rails.
That's almost always the place where we go off the rails. That energy that the anger brings can take us into places that we know we shouldn't go. That sin comes on the other side of it. And that's the part where I think it is so tricky, that we don't want to condemn the emotion of anger. Certainly, sometimes it's not appropriate, but a lot of times anger is appropriate. But to recognize that it is one of those emotions that is really good at taking us into sinful behavior, and we want to recognize that and really work hard to slow down enough, because when our mind is present, when we're thinking wisely, we're going to have a much better propensity towards being able to put off the anger and the sin that it wants to take us into.
Yeah. So the big thing that I learned from this conversation, Brian, that I think is really telling, is anger's not the problem. Truth is where it's at.
Yeah.
Do I truly understand what's going on? Because my anger responds to what I believe to be true, right?
Sure, right.
And if I start from a place of falsehood, right, then the anger that it fuels is just not going to be right, and it's not going to end well.
Exactly.
And this is what that inspection looks like. What is true? What is true, whether it's my past or what is true about what I'm hearing, what's true about my soft emotions. Trying to uncover that goes a long ways. Does that synopsis make sense to you?
Oh, yes. I think that's a really good summary and picture of what we've been talking about. And if we can consider that and work through it, I think that can be very helpful.
And perhaps step one is for all of us to say, you know what, give ourselves, again, as you said, taking ourselves less seriously, to perhaps admit that perhaps we don't see everything perfectly. And there might need to be some reforming of what I believe to be true, and that will go a long ways, and my emotions playing out appropriately.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that fits for the person who knows they experience a lot of anger, and being able to consider that, as well as the person who denies that they have a lot of anger, but everybody seems to say, boy, you seem really angry, or you seem really upset. And for that person, too, to really kind of consider maybe what they would say they believe isn't quite accurate. There's a lot of other folks that seem to have a different perspective.
What would be those earmarks of, I wonder if I'm an angry person?
Yeah.
What would be some things I could consider?
Yeah, I mean, I think that would be one for sure, that, if others seem to think that you're angry, that's a pretty big clue. But it feels like everybody's kind of being really careful. And that maybe even would be a good question. And I'd encourage you, if you can, to ask people, like, do you see me as somebody who is safe to be around? Do you feel like you have to be really careful about what you share, and that if you do share, that it's going to provoke anger? Sometimes people are careful to share for lots of different reasons, but anger could be a big one. And so I would consider that. I think if, you find yourself yelling a lot, that would be certainly a signal. Or, you can feel just that energy rising up, and maybe you just notice it, but you just feel it regularly coming up, and it doesn't take a lot. Those are probably indications of anger, and just considering, is that possible or not for you?
Yelling, actually, I've just got to pause on that point. Brian, when it comes to yelling, I'm not sure it's ever had the effect that I hope for.
Right.
Like when I'm yelling, I'm thinking, oh, this is going to be great.
Yeah.
I'm not sure I can name one example where yelling did the trick, had the effect. It just always seems great in the moment and not good when I reflect on it.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, the only thing that comes to mind that I would say is otherwise is when, let's say a child's running into a street and you yell,
For sure, yeah.
That would be
in danger.
Exactly. But in general, yeah, that yelling, and again, it's almost all of us do it. Now, there are those saints that you hear of that you're like, and my grandpa Sutter would certainly have been one of those that, I don't know that he yelled a day in his life, but most of us cannot relate to that. And that when we reflect on it, we recognize it really does not bring about what we hope for. But in the moment, we don't care. It just is coming out,
Interesting.
Yeah. Other things that come to mind, Matt, would just be like if critical, if it really kind of harsh, the tone at which you're sharing, and sometimes we're not overly aware of our tone, but that would be something to pay attention to. If everything you're saying seems really sharp and pointed and kind of corrective or critical, those would all be, I think, indications that there could be anger underneath the surface that would be helpful to work through.
Mm-hmm. As you mentioned, your grandpa Sutter thought, one of the earmarkers might be if it's not working. He probably was angry a few times,
Sure,
whatever.
sure.
And it played out well as designed.
Sure.
It had its good effect. But so much of my anger doesn't have the value, probably because it was in error,
Yeah. And it's one of those interesting emotions, I think, that in some ways, at the front end, it can be helpful and effective to bring about what we want. If it's like we're trying to get somebody's behavior to change, sometimes anger can be helpful in that. But over the long run, we desensitize towards it. And so then it requires more and more anger, and then it uses its effectiveness. And so if you find, anger is something that you're just always in, it's probably a good indication that it's not working and that maybe...
It needs to be a reset.
It needs to be a reset, yeah.
Yeah. I really appreciate this, Brian. And I just want to, echo again the hope. People can make excellent ground on their anger. Once an angry person, not always an angry person, necessarily. Is that true?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think another thing I would want to say in that too, Matt, is that your anger, while it can be destructive, that being able to recognize it, to be able to apologize and repair after it is so healthy and brings so much healing. And so to not lose heart when anger gets the best of you, and if it is something that continues to get the best of you, to keep working at it. There is a great deal of hope. It's not insurmountable, even though it's going to show up from time to time.
Yeah. Thanks for that. And thanks each one for listening in here to this podcast topic that we all can relate to. We're all recipients of other people's angers, and we do our own share of shelling it out. But I trust that this conversation can bless you and really provide the hope that it has. Yeah. That with truth, our anger can come from a good place and end in a good place as God has designed it. Thanks.